Welcome back. This is the second in a series of 7-minute free therapy sessions. And today the topic that we're going to cover is the change process and how do we change. The importance of working in the field of mental health or chemical dependency recovery or in our spiritual lives, or for that matter in any area of our lives, we need to have a serious, deliberate, intentional pathway that we're going to choose. And if you look at the change process, I want to talk about if we're going to change, we have to start with the way we think. We can have faulty thinking, which leads to problems down the road, or we can have very healthy thinking. So the way we think impacts the way we feel, which impacts our behavior, which impacts our behavioral patterns or habits, which impacts our character or our personality, and it will eventually impact our destiny and the journey that we go through in life. So here's an example of that. If I have negative thinking, if I have short thinking, if I'm kind of short and abrupt with people, if I'm negative, if I'm critical, and I want to overcome that problem, I can push that down and say, I'm going to change. But if I push that down, it will stay down for a while, but it's eventually going to push back up. And so in order to make it a long-lasting change, I have to do a lot more than just throw off my problem or stop doing my problem or having a good intention to change my problem. I have to take a look at what is the antithesis of the problem. What's the antidote? What's the opposite? So if I want to overcome abusive, hostile language, then I need to practice the gift of exhortation or lifting people up, exhorting them, having positive language, encouraging language, supportive language. And the more I practice this, the more that this will automatically shrink. So if we're going to change, it's really going to be important that we are intentional and deliberate, starting with our thought process and what we need to throw off and what we need to put on. So as you take a look at your own life, you may say, okay, I'm having certain emotional problems, perhaps depression or anxiety or irritability or anger or negativity or pessimism, or I'm having different ways of thinking, such as I minimize or deny or justify inappropriate behavior, which would be cognitive distortions. Or I have some behavioral patterns or habits that I hate and I want to overcome those. And those could be things like being negative and critical. It could be things like profanity and swearing. It could be things like getting into arguments with people. Or I may want to overcome relational problems. And perhaps I look at relationships and things aren't going well and I determine that I'm selfish. Well, if I determine that I'm selfish and I want to overcome that, I can say, quit being selfish. But eventually, that's going to push really back up unless I practice the antidote, which is being other-centered, other-focused, having a servant's heart rather than a consumer's heart. So again, in the change process, it's going to be important that it's always a two-step process, whether it's in alcohol drug recovery, throwing off alcohol and drug addiction and abuse, dependence on alcohol and drugs, and picking up something that's healthy, perhaps working a 12-step program. Or if I want to overcome an emotional problem, a behavioral problem, a relational problem, it's going to be very important that I define what the problem is that I want to focus on and to look at the antidote. Now, some people will come into therapy and they'll tell me, I don't understand why I do this. I want to look at the origins of my behavior. And I let them know that that's okay, and in some cases it may actually be helpful. But the most helpful thing they can do is clearly define what the problem is they want to overcome, and then we look at how to develop the antidote for that, and to practice until it becomes a skill. If you've learned to play an instrument or you've learned to play sports and you get better because of practice, It's the same principle. And again, the more we practice the antidote to whatever it is we wish to throw off, the more positive our behaviors will become, the more positive our thoughts will become, and the more positive our emotions will become. So, before we get into dealing with the next chapter of overcoming certain problems, I'd like you personally to think about what is it that you specifically would like to overcome and write that down. But then to be able to get some help to look at the antidote, the opposite, and be able to say, if I throw this off, that's not enough. If I throw off depression and I just become undepressed, that's not enough. So what do I want to really accomplish? Well, the opposite of depression is not becoming undepressed, it's actually finding joy and pleasure in everyday living. So one example might be to say, okay, if I have a tendency to see where the glass is always partially empty rather than partially full, where things are bad in my life rather than where things are good, I may want to practice a blessings inventory or a gratitude list or an appreciation journal. And if I start every day looking at where my glass is partially full, looking at the positives in life, the blessings in life, despite the problem. And I'm not saying that these problems don't exist and we're just going to lie to ourselves. No, these problems exist, but the blessings also exist, and we can choose in our mind which one we're going to camp out. Are we going to camp out in the problem area? And the more we do that, it's like rehearsing it, and it will get stronger and stronger. The more we practice and rehearse looking for the positives in life, we can actually put on a new set of lenses and see life in a totally different perspective. So my hope for you is that you'll be able to define clearly what it is you want to change, and that you will be successful in looking at the antidote and putting on what you'd like to become, what you'd like to accomplish, what your goal is, and that you can define this in clear behavioral terms and practice, practice, practice. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you're able to accomplish positive emotional health, behavioral health, relational health, and many blessings to you.